deadly situation unfolds on a bus when a police dog in the back refuses to disembark, and what the driver does when he notices will leave you speechless. The bus driver saw the traffic light turn red a few hundred yards ahead. Instinctively, he lifted his foot from the accelerator and started slowing down. He felt the sharp tip of the knife press into the soft skin behind his left ear. "Oh, no, you don't," the thug behind him said. "Don't slow down and don't stop." The driver glanced in his rearview mirror. The flashing blue lights of 2 patrol vehicles were following at a safe distance. The driver also saw the German Shepherd lying in the aisle behind him. The dog seemed relaxed, but the driver knew him and could see that he was on high alert. His ears were pricked forward, and his muscles were coiled. More than anything else, his eyes were fixated on the man with the knife. "At least I have one ally on the bus," the driver thought. He didn't know it yet, but he had one more outside the bus. An hour earlier, Donovan Higgins was in his driveway working on his vintage car. For years, while he was working as a K-9 officer, owning a piece of history on 4 wheels had been his dream. His daughter Maggie waved at him as she strolled down the garden path, Bear, his giant German Shepherd, hot on her heels. "Be careful, honey," he said, waving back. She laughed. "I've got Bear with me, Daddy. I'm safer than Fort Knox," and with that, she turned left and disappeared down the road. Don always felt a little uneasy when Maggie headed off to town on her own. But she was right. With Bear around, she'd be safe as houses. Don's mind started a meandering journey down memory lane. He and Bear had been partners in the truest sense for 7 years. He couldn't even remember all the arrests they'd made. Bear was fearless and the most intelligent dog Don had ever had by his side. He had the uncanny ability to sense a perpetrator in a crowd. This had often been the key to getting extremely dangerous people off the streets. They had only failed once, but he didn't want to think about that anymore. He was retired, and someone else would eventually apprehend the young thugs that terrorized the city. Maggie and Bear didn't have to wait long for the bus to arrive. The driver knew both of them and ruffled the dog's ears when they boarded. Maggie made her way to a seat close to the back of the bus with Bear and Tao. She sat down, plugged her earphones in, leaned her head back, and closed her eyes. Beside her, Bear panted while checking out the other passengers. Once he was sure there was no threat to Maggie, he lay his head on his front paws, but his eyes never closed. 10 minutes later, Bear's whole demeanor changed. A young man in his late 20s boarded the bus. The dog's senses tingled. Something about this man made him uneasy. The big German Shepherd shifted a little so he could keep the man in his line of sight. 2 stops later, another young man boarded, and Bear became even more uneasy. The man sat down next to the first man, and the dog was now on high alert. In all his years as a police dog, these instincts had been honed to a fine edge. He trusted himself, knew that he knew when something was wrong. He placed his head on Maggie's lap and gave a soft whine. At first, she simply thought that he wanted to be cuddled and started scratching between his ears. But when Bear's gentle whimpers continued, Maggie realized he was trying to get her attention. She'd known Bear since he was a puppy and knew to take him seriously when he tried to tell her something. Maggie looked at Bear carefully. She followed his gaze to the 2 young men in the seat near the front of the bus. Then the dog edged closer to her, positioning himself between her and the possible threat. Suddenly scared, Maggie pulled the headphones from her phone and messaged her dad. "I think there's trouble on the bus, Dad," she wrote. "Bear is uneasy with 2 guys that got on a couple of stops ago." Don went ice cold when he read the message. He ignored the grease on his fingers and immediately responded. What's he doing?" Maggie looked down at Bear and responded, "He's on high alert, Dad," not taking his eyes off them. A fist clamped his heart when Don read the reply. When Bear did this, it meant the situation was serious, and in all their years together, Bear had never made a mistake. "Can you take a pic without them seeing?" Maggie slid down in her seat and looked carefully at the two guys. They were in some kind of conversation, nervous perhaps, even a little jumpy, but they were looking at each other, which meant she would be able to photograph their profiles at least. She clicked a couple of pics and sent them to her father. If he'd been panicked before, Don was suddenly frantic. The two men in the picture in front of him, the two men on the bus with his daughter, were members of the gang who had eluded him for years. "I want you to get off at the next stop. Pretend that it is your stop. Don't look at them, just get off the bus. Let me know the moment you're off." Maggie did as she was told. As casually as she could, she left her seat and headed to the front of the bus. "Not your normal stop," the bus driver said. "Nope," she said as happily as she could. Other plans today. When she stepped onto the pavement and heard the doors of the bus closed with a whoosh, she texted her father, "I'm off." She was relieved, but then she looked around for Bear and felt her heart making a freefall. He wasn't with her. "Bear's not with me, Dad. I think he stayed on the bus." Don felt a lump in his throat. His daughter was safe. "Don't worry about Bear. He can take care of himself." Next, Don phoned his old office and briefed them about the situation. Radio control dispatched black and whites even before he had finished speaking. When he disconnected the call, Don jumped in his own Jeep and headed to the bus route. He'd been retired for almost a year, but these punks were unfinished business, and today was the day that unfinished became finished. On the bus, the driver became aware that Bear was sliding forward on his stomach. The dog was doing it inch by inch, slowly so nobody would notice. Man and dog made eye contact in the rearview mirror. The driver could swear Bear was communicating with him, telling him to keep doing what he was doing. And somewhere inside, he knew the dog would tell him when the time was right. The cop cars following the bus had now switched their sirens on. This made the perpetrators even more jumpy. In the rearview mirror, Bear had inched forward again. He was now sitting right behind the two criminals. The driver looked ahead again. The bus was inching closer to the traffic light, and if he sped up like the thugs wanted, he would put them all in terrible danger. But if he didn't, the men would take the passengers hostage. He needed a diversion, and he needed it now. Thankfully, the dog sitting in the aisle could provide the perfect one. When their eyes met again, Bear's ears flicked forward, and he rose into a crouch. The driver understood that to be his signal, and what he did next left all his passengers speechless. Without warning, he slammed on the brakes. The purr with the knife almost went through the windshield and staggered backward to regain his balance. That's when Bear launched himself. The thug and the dog met in midair. Bear's giant body smashed into the man with a force that winded him. Without wasting a second, Bear turned on the second criminal. The man was trying to run down the aisle to the back of the bus, but the dog caught him halfway and effortlessly pulled him down. The bus came to a standstill, and 3 officers in full body armor boarded, firearms drawn. When Bear stepped off the bus, Don was waiting next to Maggie. The dog ran towards his family, happy to have been of service one more time. And when both the driver and Bear received a medal for their bravery days later, they knew that this was the happily ever after they deserved. What a scary adventure. Have you ever seen a true police dog in action? Would you have understood the signal in the driver's place? Tell us in the comments. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.